So I'll read you. I'm gonna read you kind of two versions of the koan, and then we'll share about it. So this is case 37 from the Mumonkan, the oak tree in the front of the garden. The case. A monk asked Joshu in all earnestness, "What is the meaning of the patriarchs coming from the west?" Joshu said, "The oak tree in the front of the garden." And then the case 47 from the Book of Equanimity, I kind of wanted to read this to you too because I really liked the preface to the assembly. So the preface is, "The cypress tree in the garden, the flapping flag on the pole, as a blossom bespeaks the boundless spring, a drop bespeaks the ocean's water. The 500-year-old Buddha clearly leaves the usual stream, not falling into speech or thought. How do you express it?" And I had a note to myself from the Book of Equanimity translation that this is a Dharmakaya koan, which is emphasizing the world of unity. So there's 4 characters in this. No, this is awkward. I have to hold up my notes. There's 4 characters in the koan, and so there's the monk, there's Joshu, there's the patriarch, Bodhidharma, and there's the oak tree. And so I want to kind of share a little bit about sort of each of those perspectives as we put ourselves into each of those aspects. But I also wanted to share kind of how the koan came up for me. Was there's a dead pine tree. There was a dead pine tree in my front yard, and Southern California Edison, if the pine tree is within a certain amount of distance of the power poles, will take it down, which was a huge relief because that could be very expensive to happen. And at 7 o'clock in the morning on Friday morning, this truck rolled up with the Southern California Edison logo on the truck, and I didn't know that they were coming that day. So anyway, I got to kind of watch this, quite a bit of this whole process of taking the tree down. But what was striking me was that the tree died from bark beetle. So bark beetles penetrate into trees when they're weakened, and so this tree was probably weakened by drought, and that's what caused it to die. I went out in between during Kinhin and counted, and the tree probably is 100 years old. And there's sawdust scattered all around my yard, and my first kind of feeling had been, I can't wait for it to rain to kind of wash away some of the sawdust. And this morning I was just feeling, wow, that's like the being of the tree that is all around my yard, as well as all the rounds of the wood. So the connection here for me, besides that it's going to directly relate back to the oak tree in the front of the garden, so for me, a parallel could be the pine trees in the front of the garden. Joshu was referring to, from what I understand, his temple. There were a lot of oak trees there. So in a certain sense, he's not talking about something, he is talking about something profound. And at the same time, the response to the monk was not a rarefied response. It was just, what's the meaning of the patriarch coming from the west? Oak tree in the front of the garden. Wheelbarrow tipped up stump of the pine tree. Birds at the bird feeder. He could have said any of those things. How it was connecting for me with the tree coming down was, Seisin referred to so many things happening in the world. Earlier in the week, I had read a fairly extensive article in the New York Times about the most recent UN report on climate change. And there was also sort of an accompanying article in the New York Times about the anxiety and despair that is now being documented of how we feel in response to climate change. And there were a couple of, the article actually emphasized the mental health effects of climate change relative to anxiety and stress. And a couple of the statistics really struck me. So 3/4 of people from the ages of 16 to 25 in 10 countries are frightened about the future, reported being frightened about the future. And 40% of young people said that they don't intend to have children because they're afraid about what the world would be like that they're bringing into. And both my children feel that way. So what I kind of wanted to bring up here is the sense of despair that we can feel, that we do feel, I assume you feel. And a friend of mine and a member of our sitting group with Ari and I has really been emphasizing so much when we're talking about grief, that grief is a natural response to love. It's like we feel grief because we love. And what was coming up for me in response to despair is because we feel connected. Why do we feel despair about the changes in the natural world, or the what's happening in Eastern Europe? Because we naturally feel connection, because that is the reality of unity. That is the reality of connection. So kind of moving out of a theoretical sense of interconnectedness and unity. But this is the actuality of our experience. So in terms of the characters in the koan, the monk asks in all earnestness. That's a really good pointer for us, in all earnestness. And Maizumi Roshi used to always say that the most important quality that we could bring to practice is sincerity. So our in all earnestness, wanting to really plumb an understanding of our life, that's really important. It's essential. And so the monk is asking in all earnestness. And then the next character is the patriarch. So that's understood to be Bodhidharma, bringing Zen from India, I think to study and to also share from India to China. And I was kind of thinking about, because I think the sort of understanding, is what's the meaning of Zen coming from the West. But I was really feeling into what would motivate, what motivates us to want to share about the Dharma, what motivated Bodhidharma, and liberation. He sincerely, earnestly sought that for himself, and then he wanted to travel to share that miracle with others, that it is possible to liberate ourselves from our own self-preoccupation and our sense of separateness, and realize the world of unity and connectedness. So thank you, Bodhidharma. Um, and then Joshu answers the oak tree in the front of the garden. And so as I was mentioning, apparently this is from Yamada's comments in the Humankan, that Kannon Monastery, where Joshu lived, there were a lot of oak trees there. And I remember when I was first working on this koan, it was the version with the cypress tree. And I was looking up all these pictures of cypress trees in China, and I felt like by osmosis I was going to get the koan by just looking at cypress trees. So we try all means, right? um, so what about this? What about this oak tree? I wanted to read you. There's this teacher that I've encountered. His name is Henry Shookman. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's a contemporary Zen teacher. And I don't know anything about the Sanbo Kyodan lineage, but that's where his lineage, and he's at Mountain Cloud Zen Center in Santa Fe. And I actually did an online little workshop. He did a kind of an examination of a sutra, and that's how I encountered him. And like I don't know what but in the age of the internet, you get to look up other people's talks about the koan that you're examining. So I wanted to read you something from his talk about this koan. Buddhism itself, in a sense, began with a tree. After exhausting the possibilities of materialistic pleasure and ascetic mortification, and finding his heart still not at peace, Shakyamuni sat down under a banyan tree, determined not to get up until he had resolved the great matter of life, death, suffering, and identity. After sitting for 6 days, it happened. He woke up from the dream of self and other, life and death, and became a Buddha, an awakened one. The tree became forever known as the Bodhi tree. So I just really loved how he said awakened from the dream of self and other. And that really is the center of our practice. Seisen's been emphasizing so much the importance of seeing into no self. So, which doesn't, of course, mean we don't have our individual experiences, but what does that really mean, the world of unity and the world of non-separation? And sitting with this koan, really the last couple of days, it's just such an amazing space that we get to experience and practice, of really soaking, maybe is a way to put it, soaking into the absorption with life. I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but we did, a really good friend of mine is a yoga teacher, and she and I do a half day, we're kind of ramping it up again to do it each month, of yoga and meditation on Saturday morning. And we held that yesterday. And our theme was the wilderness within. And we did an activity where we had people just go around in the yard and pick a spot and really come into a space of being with themselves, and then open up to just kind of focusing on one part of nature that they would find in the yard. And it was just so lovely to hear people's sharings when we came back and we kind of finished with council. The feelings that people had of immersion with leaning against a dead oak tree in the backyard, or somebody shared about watching a hummingbird, and this capacity we have to really forget ourselves and be absorbed by life. And isn't that just such a relief. To really feel that Dharmakaya, the oneness or the unity of all things as a lived experience in our own lives, and how the world is always calling to us to offer that to us. So I think it is maybe an important aspect to also, Joshu could have answered in any way about what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West. But it seems as if, and the commentary, at least from Yamato Roshi, would corroborate, that the picking of something, quote unquote, ordinary in the front yard was intentional. It's like, what is the deepest meaning of life? Why am I here? What is going on that we all have as our sort of basic life koan? And it wasn't a rarefied answer. It wasn't certainly it wouldn't have been a philosophical or a theoretical answer from a Zen master, but an ordinary, the oak tree in the front of the garden, the pine tree in my front yard, the wheelbarrow, the palm that's now gone from the walkway at Sweetwater, or the kumquat tree that's still outside the yurt, for those of you who are sitting there. So this simple koan, on the surface of it, it holds the answer to the whole thing. Our deepest questions. Who am I? What does interconnectedness really mean? Why do we despair about the goings on of the world? How is my life actually the life of oneness?
I'm so sorry to interrupt. If we could just have you just remember to speak up a little bit. We're having a little trouble hearing you here.
Okay. I'm sorry. I get quieter inside and I get quieter outside, so I apologize. Thanks, Choa. So I'll just say what I just said a little bit again, so make sure that you heard. So this simple koan communicates to us, I think, the answers to the most profound questions that we grapple with as human beings. Who am I really? What is going on in this life? What's my purpose for being here? How do I actually find peace in the midst of all of what's going on? And at least for me, how do I really confirm non-separation? How do I really confirm to myself and live a life of non-separation? So I also liked how Henry had this statement in his talk. When all ideas have fallen to the ground like leaves, when our sense of self and our attachment to life and death has also fallen to the ground, then the true life of the Dharma can bloom in us. We find it pouring forth all around, a creative force beyond all reckoning, in which we fully participate, in which we can't help but participate. Whether we friggin' want to or not in any given moment, because it hurts. So I want to just finish with a poem that was offered at the end of our event yesterday afternoon, and it was kind of in addressing this theme of the wilderness within, which I really like, as far as how does the wilderness within, how is that the same as the wilderness without? And what was coming up for me, I met somebody recently who I sort of quote unquote saying he shares my origin story, just because he's from the Bronx, and he's, has native New Yorker parents, and he's very Jewish in his origins, and so I feel like he kind of shares my origin story in a way. And what was coming up for me about the oak tree is the oak tree and I share the same origin story. We are the same. We have the same root that we arise from. So here is a poem just to finish out. And it's maybe a place where we come back to that. How do we rest into that? It's from Wendell Berry. The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night, at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with the forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time I rest, and for a time I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free.